Ethan adjusted his grip on the flashlight, the cold metal slick with rain. The storm had rolled in quickly, smothering the town in darkness, save for the occasional flicker of lightning cutting through the sky. It was the kind of night that made people double-check their locks, the wind howling like a warning no one could quite understand. But then, beneath the roar of the storm, there was something else, a sound so faint it almost wasn't there. A whimper. Ethan froze on the porch step. "Did you hear that?" His daughter, Lily, tugged at the sleeve of his jacket, her small fingers clinging tightly. She was 10, fearless in a way only children could be, her dark eyes wide with curiosity rather than fear. "I heard it," he murmured. The sound came again, softer this time, almost drowned by the rain. It was coming from beneath the porch. Lily took a step forward, but Ethan held out an arm, stopping her. "Stay here," he said. She frowned but didn't argue. Crouching, Ethan angled the flashlight toward the gap beneath the wooden plank. Shadows stretched in all directions, tangled in a mess of old leaves and dirt. Then, something moved. A small, trembling form huddled against the foundation. Wet fur clung to bony ribs, its body barely more than a fragile scrap of life. It was a puppy, but something about it made Ethan hesitate. The way it stared back at him, golden eyes round and unblinking, felt too intense, too intelligent. Most stray dogs had a kind of skittish, darting fear in their gaze. This one studied him. Carefully, he reached out. The puppy didn't flinch, didn't cower. It let him scoop it up, its body limp with exhaustion. He could feel its rapid heartbeat against his palm, quick and uneven. "Dad," Lily whispered, peering over his shoulder. "Is it okay?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Up close, the puppy looked even worse, soaked to the bone, its fur dark but oddly reflective under the porch light. Its breathing was shallow, each rise and fall of its tiny ribs an effort. He glanced toward the house. "We need to get it inside." Lily nodded eagerly, already holding the door open as he stepped inside. The warmth of their home wrapped around them like a blanket, but the puppy barely reacted. No shivering, no desperate scrambling for comfort. It simply stared. Ethan set it down on a towel, and grabbed another to dry it off. As he rubbed the damp fur, he noticed something strange. No collar. No scars. No dirt. For a stray, the pup was clean. Too clean. Lily sat cross-legged beside it, her hands hovering, hesitant. "Can I touch him?" Ethan hesitated but nodded. Gently. She reached out, fingers brushing against the fur. The puppy finally moved, just slightly, tilting its head as if acknowledging her. Lily giggled. "He's soft." Ethan didn't respond. His attention was fixed on the puppy's chest, where its heartbeat was oddly slow now. Almost too slow. Something wasn't right. "I'll get some food," he said, standing. "Maybe that'll help." Lily nodded, still transfixed. "I think he likes us." Ethan wasn't so sure. In the kitchen, he grabbed a can of dog food from the pantry. As he peeled back the lid, the metallic scent hit his nose, familiar and strong. He scooped some into a dish and walked back to the living room. But the puppy didn't move, didn't sniff the air, didn't so much as glance at the food. Ethan frowned. Even the weakest strays usually had enough instinct to eat. "Maybe he's scared," Lily offered, though doubt flickered across her face. "Maybe," Ethan said, but the explanation felt flimsy. Then, as if sensing his unease, the puppy lifted its gaze. For a moment, Ethan swore something flickered across its golden eyes, something too sharp, too knowing. A brief glint, like a reflection of something unseen. Then it was gone. His stomach tightened. "We should take him to the vet first thing in the morning," he said. Lily looked up, alarmed. "You think something's wrong with him?" Ethan forced a reassuring smile. "Just to be safe." She didn't look convinced, but she nodded. "Can we keep him?" Ethan exhaled slowly. He didn't want to make promises. Not until he understood what, exactly, they had just brought into their home. "We'll see." Lily grinned and curled up beside the puppy, stroking its back. The pup remained perfectly still. Too still. Ethan kept his eyes on it long after Lily had fallen asleep, his unease growing with each silent, unmoving minute that passed. The first rays of dawn slipped through the blinds, painting the living room in soft gold. Ethan sat in his armchair, his body stiff from a restless night. His gaze never left the puppy, still curled on the towel beside Lily. It hadn't moved once. Most puppies would have shifted in their sleep, twitching paws as they dreamt. This one remained eerily still, its breathing so faint it was almost imperceptible. Ethan leaned forward, pressing his fingers lightly against its chest. A heartbeat, slow, measured, deliberate. Too deliberate. He glanced at Lily, her small hand still resting on the pup's back. She looked so peaceful, unaware of the unease gnawing at him. He didn't want to wake her, but something about this wasn't right. Carefully, he lifted the puppy. It didn't resist, its body limp in his hands. Again, the sense of unnatural stillness made his skin prickle. He had dealt with stray animals before, sick ones, injured ones, frightened ones. This was different. He carried it to the kitchen and set it down on the counter. The puppy opened its eyes, those golden irises locking onto him with unnerving focus. Ethan swallowed. "You're a strange one, aren't you?" The puppy blinked once. The moment stretched, thick with something unspoken. Ethan shook himself and grabbed his keys. The bell above the clinic door chimed as Ethan stepped inside, the puppy cradled against his chest. The smell of antiseptic filled the air, a familiar sterility that usually brought relief. Today, it did nothing to ease the tension in his gut. Dr. Maxwell looked up from the reception desk, his gray brows lifting. "Ethan, didn't expect to see you this early." Ethan nodded, setting the puppy down on the exam table. "Found this little guy under my porch last night. Something's off." Dr. Maxwell wiped his hands on his coat and stepped closer. He had been the town's veterinarian for over 30 years, a man who had seen everything from neglected strays to exotic pets people had no business owning. But the moment he touched the puppy, his expression darkened. His fingers pressed gently along its ribs, down its legs, over the delicate bones of its paws. The puppy didn't flinch, didn't react at all. "No signs of malnutrition," he murmured. "No injuries. Coat's a little damp, but—" He stopped. Ethan leaned in. "What?" Dr. Maxwell didn't answer immediately. Instead, he carefully pried open the puppy's mouth, checking its teeth. His breath hitched. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. "Doc." Dr. Maxwell closed the puppy's mouth and straightened, his face pale. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "This can't be." A cold wave washed over Ethan. He had known something was wrong, but hearing those words that didn't belong in a vet's office, spoken with that level of disbelief, sent a shiver down his spine. "What do you mean?" Dr. Maxwell hesitated, then gestured for him to follow. He led Ethan into the back room, where a wall of X-ray monitors lined the far side. He motioned for the puppy, and Ethan carefully placed it on the table. "We'll run a scan," Maxwell said. "I need to be sure." Ethan stood in tense silence as the machine hummed to life, scanning the tiny body. A minute later, an image appeared on the screen. Ethan's stomach dropped. The skeleton on the monitor looked wrong. The bones were there, yes, but they weren't quite right. The proportions were subtly off, the structure too symmetrical. And then there was the unmistakable fact that "There's no digestive system," Dr. Maxwell whispered. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "What?" Maxwell pointed to the scan. "No stomach. No intestines. No organs for processing food." Ethan shook his head, trying to make sense of it. "That's impossible. It's alive. It has a heartbeat." Dr. Maxwell tapped the screen again, his fingers trembling slightly. "Look closer." Ethan did. And the longer he stared, the more he realized. The heart wasn't beating. The structure was there, sitting perfectly in the chest cavity, but it was static, unmoving, as if frozen in time. A sharp chill crawled up Ethan's spine. The puppy lay motionless on the table, watching them. Not with the wide-eyed confusion of an animal sensing human distress, but with something else. Something patient. Ethan swallowed hard. "What is this?" Dr. Maxwell exhaled shakily. "I don't know." The puppy blinked, tilting its head slightly. And for the first time, Ethan felt it, an undeniable certainty deep in his gut. This was no ordinary stray. And whatever it wasn't supposed to exist. The clinic was silent, save for the hum of the X-ray machine cooling down. Ethan could hear his own heartbeat, a steady drumbeat of disbelief hammering in his chest. The image on the screen hadn't changed. The puppy's bones were intact, but there were no organs. No lungs, no stomach, no evidence that this thing needed anything to survive. Yet, it was alive. Dr. Maxwell stepped back, rubbing a hand over his mouth, his usual calm demeanor cracked by sheer incredulity. "I've worked with animals for over 30 years, Ethan. I've seen mutations, rare conditions, even genetic anomalies that defied logic." He turned his gaze to the puppy, now sitting obediently on the table. "But this isn't possible." Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry. Could the machine be malfunctioning? Maxwell shook his head. "I ran a scan on a lab cat just this morning. Perfectly normal." He exhaled sharply, his fingers trembling slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "This isn't a technical error. This is something else." Ethan glanced at the puppy, half expecting it to sprout wings or vanish into thin air. But it remained perfectly still, those golden eyes locked onto him with eerie patience. "We need to do more tests," Maxwell muttered, moving toward his supply cabinet. He pulled out a syringe and a collection tube, rolling up his sleeve. "If this thing has no organs, I want to see what's in its blood." Ethan wasn't sure why, but an instinctual unease slithered through him. The idea of drawing blood from the puppy suddenly felt wrong. Maxwell pressed the syringe's needle gently against the skin near the puppy's foreleg. It didn't flinch, didn't react at all. The needle went in easily. Then Maxwell pulled back the plunger. Nothing. No blood filled the tube. He frowned, adjusting the angle slightly. He tried again. Still nothing. Ethan stepped closer. "Is that even possible?" Maxwell's jaw tightened. "No." The puppy blinked, the only indication that it was even aware of what was happening. It wasn't resisting. It wasn't in pain. It was just letting this happen. Maxwell set the syringe down carefully, his movements slow and deliberate. "Ethan," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "This thing, whatever it is, doesn't function like a living being should." Ethan's gut twisted. He already knew that. He had known it the moment he first touched the pup, the way its heartbeat had felt unnatural, too measured. But if it wasn't alive, what was it? Maxwell opened his mouth to say something else, but then, the lights flickered. The overhead fluorescence stuttered, casting the room into momentary darkness before snapping back on. Ethan's breath hitched. The air felt heavier somehow, charged with something unseen. Maxwell turned sharply toward the puppy. His hands clenched into fists. Then the X-ray screen distorted. The image wavered, static crawling across the display like fingers of black ink seeping through the monitor. The puppy's skeletal outline twisted, flickering between shapes that weren't right. For a split second, Ethan saw something that made his skin crawl, a form that wasn't canine at all. Maxwell cursed, lunging forward to shut the machine off, but before he could reach it, the screen went black with a sharp pop. Silence. Ethan's breath came ragged now. His mind screamed at him to move, to leave, but his body was rooted in place. His eyes darted to the puppy. It was watching him, and then, for the first time, it moved. Not in the way a dog would shift its weight or stretch after lying still. This was deliberate, calculated. It stood up with slow precision, each motion smooth, unnatural in its perfection. Ethan's throat tightened. "Doc." Maxwell didn't respond. He was still staring at the dead screen, his face pale. The puppy's mouth parted slightly. Not a bark, not a whimper, just a small, soundless movement. And then Ethan heard it. Not with his ears. With his mind. A whisper. Soft. Indistinct. Like words spoken just beyond the veil of comprehension. His pulse thundered in his ears. He took a step back. Did you hear that? Maxwell finally turned to him, his eyes wide with something dangerously close to fear. I think, he said hoarsely, we need to put it back where you found it. Ethan hesitated, his mind at war with itself. The logical part of him demanded an explanation. But every primal instinct in his body screamed at him to listen. The puppy tilted its head slightly. And Ethan realized. It wasn't just looking at him. It was waiting. Ethan's fingers trembled as he reached for the crate. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to get this thing, this not dog, out of the clinic. But a deeper part of him hesitated, unwilling to act too quickly, afraid of what might happen if he did. The puppy, or whatever it was, remained perfectly still, golden eyes fixed on him, unreadable. It didn't resist when he scooped it up, its small body unnervingly light. It should have wriggled, whined, done something to protest being handled. Instead, it simply allowed itself to be placed inside the crate, its stare never once breaking. Maxwell moved stiffly, every motion careful, as if he feared any sudden movement might provoke a reaction. He double-checked the latch, then exhaled a shaky breath. We take it back, he murmured. Now. Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. The fluorescent lights above flickered again, just for a moment, casting strange shadows against the walls. Neither of them spoke as they carried the crate out of the clinic. The night air was thick with humidity, pressing against Ethan's skin like a heavy, invisible weight. The silence was unnatural, no chirping insects, no rustling leaves, just a vast, hollow emptiness stretching through the dark. Ethan placed the crate on the passenger seat of his truck, his breath uneven. What if? He hesitated, unable to finish the thought. What if it doesn't let us? Maxwell shut the truck door with more force than necessary. We don't ask what ifs. We just do it. The drive back to the old house was suffocating. Ethan kept glancing at the crate, half expecting it to rattle, for the thing inside to change. But the puppy remained still, curled up in the corner, its golden eyes glowing faintly in the dim light of the dashboard. It was watching him. Ethan clenched the wheel tighter, his knuckles white. Doc, he began, keeping his voice low. What if it's not just something unnatural? What if it's someone? Maxwell didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. Then we never should have brought it here. The old house emerged from the darkness, its rotting porch barely visible beneath the overgrowth. Ethan killed the engine, letting the silence swallow them again. The air felt heavier here, charged with something unseen, something ancient. They stepped out, crate in hand. The puppy inside remained unnervingly calm. Ethan hesitated. We just leave it? Maxwell's expression was grim. We return it. They carried the crate to the same spot beneath the porch where Ethan had found it. The space felt different now, darker, colder, as if the very air had thickened with unseen weight. Ethan knelt, unlatching the crate. His hands were slick with sweat. The puppy stepped out. But it didn't run. Didn't whimper. Didn't even stretch. It simply turned around. And looked. For a long, breathless moment, nothing happened. Then, a shape moved in the darkness. Not the puppy. Something else. The shadows beneath the porch shifted, coiling, stretching. Ethan felt a cold dread seep into his bones as he realized, they were not alone. A whisper slithered through the air, not a sound but a sensation, brushing against the edges of his mind. He didn't understand the words, but he felt them, a presence pressing against his thoughts like fingers against glass. The puppy took another step forward. And then, it wasn't a puppy anymore. The transformation was seamless, a ripple through reality itself. One moment there was a small, golden-eyed dog. The next, a tall, indistinct figure, its form flickering between shapes too fast for the mind to comprehend. Ethan staggered back, his breath stolen. Maxwell's hand shot out, gripping his shoulder in a vice-like hold. The figure watched them. Not with malice. Not with gratitude. With understanding. Then, slowly, it stepped backward into the shadows. The darkness swallowed it whole. The air shifted. The weight pressing down on them lifted. The night sounds returned, crickets, the distant rustle of wind through trees. It was gone. Ethan released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He turned to Maxwell, who looked just as shaken. Maxwell swallowed. "We never speak of this." Ethan nodded. They left without another word. And behind them, beneath the porch, the shadows whispered once more.